Welcome to Searching for Answers, the program where we really read the Bible, read it deeply and thoughtfully, and really talk about it, and examine as best we can what it meant when it was written and what the text means in our lives still today. We are closing in on the latter part of the first letter of John to the early churches, John 1. At the latter part of chapter 4, and then we'll go on through chapter 5. With me this evening are Professor Bernard Taylor, Old Testament and New Testament scholar here in the Loma Linda area, and Pastor Beverly Maravilla on the pastoral staff at the La Sierra University Church. And my name is John Jones, La Sierra University. And while you get your Bible, we're going to get started. So find 1 John near the end of your New Testament, and here we go. Professor Bernard, chapter 4, verse 16, part B. We're dividing the verse here. Take it over and lead us into it.
All right, we have been reading about God and His love and His abiding, and the theme continues, but in essence it's a new paragraph. So let me read from there to the end of chapter 4. God is love, and those who abide in love abide in God, and God abides in them. Love has been perfected among us in this, that we may have boldness on the day of judgment, because as He is, so are we in this world. There is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear, for fear has to do with punishment, and whoever fears has not reached perfection in love. We love because He first loved us. Those who say, I love God, and hate their brothers or sisters are liars. For those who do not love a brother or sister whom they have seen cannot love God whom they have not seen. The commandment we have from Him is this: those who love God must love their brothers and sisters also.
Yes, the New Revised Standard Version.
Yes.
Yeah. Good. There are phrases and sentences that are really familiar to Bible readers here, aren't there? Perfect love casts out fear. We love because He first loved us. We who have not seen God, how can we love Him if we don't love those whom we do see? So sometimes it's easier to love those who we don't see in the abstract, isn't it?
Yes, they make no demands on us.
They make no demands on us. So here we are. God is love. One of the most memorable expressions in all the New Testament.
It's easy to feel as though we've walked in on a wedding sermon.
And not unlike one we've heard rather recently, in fact.
Yes, and to view it that way is in some significant ways to do violence to it. Because it is to put the passage aside and say, we only talk about love in marriage. But God is love. That is remarkably profound, and we have heard it being said over and over. This is what Christianity worked hard to try and get across to the audience, who had no counterpart in any of the other religions of the day that was founded so firmly on love. God is love, and God abides in those who abide in the love of God. A key word in two key words, love and abiding.
Yeah.
And then he talks about love being perfected and having boldness on the day of judgment. Because as He is, so are we in this world. Such a high view of the standing of the Christians in the light of God. And perfect love casts out fear, for fear has to do with punishment. And unfortunately, many of you who are listening find that fear of punishment keeps you from really believing that God loves. And this is put the other way round. Punishment has no place because love casts out fear, and God is love.
So even if our love may still have a ways to go,
Yes.
given that we're human, God's love is absolute.
Yes.
And that is the guarantee of our boldness before the judgment.
And then verse 19, if you happen to be reading from the King James Version, there's one little preposition difference. This says, we love because he first loved us. I learned it, and many of you did too, that we love him because he first loved us. And that is true, but it's not the point that is being made here. Our capacity to love is divine. We love because he first loved us. And some translations thought this was to be read differently, let us love. But then you can't finish the sentence if you begin that way. And when you say let us love, you need someone or something to love. Let us love him. But we love because he first loved us. And then this verse that you've already referred to, that you can't love God if you can't love his children.
Yeah.
You know that expression, love me, love my kids. Don't come criticizing my kids to me. We can talk about it, but not criticism. And God says the same thing. And yet so often in my pastoral experience, there were people who were go into rhapsody over their love for God as a preamble to the people that they couldn't understand and felt that they should be dealt with and maybe put out of the church or something like that. And this verse has been an inspiration to me. We need to learn to live with one another and to get along, and that's still the issue today. So, what's the command? Those who love God must love their brothers and sisters also. Early Christian church, problems getting along. And it's still the same today. You go into a church, there are problems, you leave the church, and unfortunately many of the, with the issues unresolved, and they're the same.
Yes.
Human nature.
So it is. And we do know from the pages of this good book, there were certainly tensions among the various congregations and maybe between them.
Yes.
And yet, it was also a kind of a byword in the larger Roman Empire about Christians. Look how they love one another. Yeah. So at least something was growing in the right direction, right?
Yes.
And we've had 2,000 years to work on it, and we've got a ways to go yet, don't we? Yes, well said, Bernard. Thank you for summarizing that so well. That verse 19, we love. Yes, you mentioned that some versions will say, we love him, that is to say, God. But it looks like some of the ancient manuscripts have that word, him, in there.
Yes.
Most do not, but it appears rather that someone inserted the him rather than that someone had the original word him and took it out. We cannot imagine that the word would have been dropped, but it's easy to imagine it being added and then going into the copying and recopying of the subsequent manuscripts in that way. So I think as much as the King James gives us good bases for, textual bases for our Bibles, nonetheless, this is one of the instances where I think the Revised Standard has it right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, where does that leave us, Bev?
I am looking at verse 18, there is no fear in love.
Yeah.
And I think it's a helpful observation that maybe what is being pointed out is that this is a scary experience to love. It's a very vulnerable experience. And also a theme that we've seen throughout the entire book has been a struggle on loving others very different from us. Whatever is alien from us, it is very difficult to love. And then even also being able to redefine what love is, I think is a very scary experience to kind of explore what that could possibly mean.
Bigger than only romantic.
Right, and for English, I think for our English language, we have only one word really.
Yeah.
And in the Greek, there are several.
But
right?
you got to love it.
Yeah, you gotta love it. Yeah, and so I think that is quite a struggle. This is not, and there's no implication that he's suggesting that it is a romantic love, but
Sure.
But even so, we still have to translate, and I think that for us, it is a struggle to think that we could love someone on not a surface level, right? And a lot of the times when we think, love your brother or your sister, a lot of the times I think people translate that to be nice. And I think this is not be nice. I think this is be
It's something much more profound.
Yeah, something much more profound in terms of creating a community that values one another in the same way that God values God's creation is significant work, and it will be inconvenient, and it will be tough. And I think in the same way that the Christian church struggles, I think sometimes we know Christians to be nice, and then when it means stretching ourselves to really love our community well and accept people in a way that Jesus might have accepted people, it's really difficult for this church, and it's really difficult for our church. And then we have stories where Christians aren't so nice, and we're not known for our love. And I think that word fear is capturing that a little bit.
Yeah,
that
right.
It's not an easy road. So that has been a thought of mine is look for that. And then 21, the commandment we have from him is this, to love one another, love their brothers and their sisters. That word commandment is pretty strong, and I think that it's helpful to think about it not so much as a rule, but as a value. These are the things that God deeply values for, this is not so much this is not your do and your don't list. This is, as much as it is, want to know how to live, want to know how to do life as the Creator has commanded everything else into being, into creation. We go back to, our Genesis story, and, this aligns itself with...
Yeah. You can't really command love, can you?
You cannot. Which is
Thou shalt
the
love.
irony,
Doesn't work very well.
Well,
And yet.
you can command love, but you can't command emotion. Love is principle.
Principle.
And while this is not romantic love, it is not without emotion. And I think it's important for us, this isn't some dry law with harshness and yes, all of that.
And in the same way, though it doesn't lack emotion, I think a lot of the times we lean into love as a feeling, and when we don't feel it, then maybe there isn't love to be had. So that's a really helpful being able to differentiate that as well. Just because you don't feel like you don't love someone doesn't mean that there isn't love there. And I think this is moving beyond that. This is also calling it out to, this is not a feeling either, but emotion is deep, and it is sacred and holy,
The emotion does follow the principle. Picking up and pushing a little further along with you, Bev, on the thing about fear, I have been impressed so much in recent years to what extent, how immediate and dominant the emotion of fear is, and as a motivator in our lives.
Right.
We are prompted in our actions and what we do, the decisions we make. We are driven, it seems to me, more often by our fears than by anything else. And yet, here is the antidote. It is love, and it's principled love. It's a way of seeing and being and interacting that is taken as the basic platform, not a foundation of fear, but a foundation of love on which we stand and go forward from there. Wow, that's easy to say.
Right.
But I think the only way to really get, we may have episodes where we think we're living up to that, but to really get consistent about that, it really only comes from God. And I think we need to think of ourselves as simply the ego needs to step aside with that attitude, and simply think of ourselves as a hollow channel, right? for the divine to flow through us. I think that's the only way that we can continue to grow and ripen and mature and deepen our spirituality. It's God in us. And that doesn't make us God. We will always be fallible, short-fallen humans, but here we are. The principle, after all we've read in this letter, now the author comes down to sort of round it up. He's talked about abiding in the world and in one another and in the Spirit and in the Lord. Now, here it is. That's why this last paragraph has so much in it that echoes in our minds over the years. We hear these sentences. Our problem is to actualize them in our lives. Yeah?
What comes to mind when I read this about no fear? So often we talk, and if somebody says, "Are you afraid?" Well, of course I am. Who wouldn't be?
Sure.
And it reminds me of those people who are strapped on flat on their back and sitting on top of a huge tank that will eventually explode and will throw them into orbit, and they monitor their heart rate, and it might go up 1 or 2 beats a minute because they know, they trust, they love what they're doing. Find a way to throw the word in. And but we are not allowing ourselves to trust to that level, including myself very much in this as well. And so early in the Christian church, they struck a point, maybe because it was so different from where they were, and it was a life or death issue for them, and they embraced it and decided that this is who they were going to be in this situation.
No matter what.
No matter what. Death was not to them the great ogre to be feared. Life was short anyway, and so here was a way with a life beyond. And so they loved it. They stepped into this, and it was life-changing. And the apostles themselves were living this out.
Yeah.
They met regularly.
Yeah.
They were a team. They supported each other, and they were in it together, whatever it held. And so why be afraid? What's there to be afraid of? This is not, losing one's life is not the end. And so here we are, and this is, again, early Christian church.
Yeah. Yeah. They were not perfect, but
No.
they were ahead of us in some ways. Now, let me just ask you, Bernard, in this paragraph, as in many previous paragraphs, here we have 3 occasions of the expression brothers and sisters. Anything you want to say about that turn of phrase?
Yes, by all means. One of the features of the New Revised Standard and later the TNIV was the realization that the slavish translation of the Greek words into English, anthropos was translated as man, whereas it's like anthropology, the study of people, and Anaya is a male, and on reflection, the translators realized that this wasn't a religion addressed only to men.
Yeah.
And so brothers and sisters, now that's
is appropriate, even though
Adelphos, and so
Adelphi.
yes,
Yeah. So
and they always indicate it throughout the New Testament to say
we added.
yes, we've added this. The Greek only has the brothers, but clearly the force of it as you follow through, and in a lot of places, with that careful eye, it was found to be far more gender inclusive than anyone even imagined when they started, unless they had worked through it and studied it.
Yeah. So it does broaden our perceptions and our thoughts. We are simply reminded here of the inclusiveness of divine love, which embraces all of us, and so the translation should reflect that.
Yeah.
Anything more further on that before we move on? Yeah, if we've covered the ground.
No, I think now it's the homework is to go and let it sit and to let
Yes,
it, just to move through us, because it is tough, I think.
To read it on our knees. That's
Yeah.
what we need to do, isn't it?
Yeah.
So here we are. Now, again, we've reminded our good viewers that the chapter divisions are secondary. They are not represented in the original. They were added centuries later. And so we come to what we call chapter 5 now. It is a bit of a break, but nonetheless we move forward. Beverly, you want to pick up with chapter 5 and the opening verse, and I don't know, take us down through the first 5 verses or so.
Sure. And I'm in the New Revised Standard Version also. So
Yeah.
everyone who believes that Jesus is the Christ has been born of God, and everyone who loves the parents loves the child. By this we know that we love the children of God when we love God and obey his commandments. For the love of God is this, that we obey his commandments, and his commandments are not burdensome. For whatever is born of God conquers the world. This is the victory that conquers the world, our faith. Who is it that conquered the world but the one who believes that Jesus is the Son of God?
Wow, that's pretty triumphalistic language in a
Yes,
way,
yeah.
isn't it? Where should we pick up here? What strikes you?
It's affirming everything from the previous chapter, and in some ways, I think it's very helpful. Sometimes we resource ourselves to know where love can come from and where we can be a community. And in this way, it's believe in Jesus, follow this person and their life, and this experience that Jesus has been through the toughest and has had to conquer loving what was what was difficult to love. But it gives us kind of that, if you can get there with Jesus, then you might be able to get there with someone else. And you Dr. Taylor, you quoted this, love the parent, love the child. Those who can love the parent can love the child. And in the same way, a beautiful thing I think also that happens here is reminding us that as we look at people around us, people don't exist as isolated islands. They belong to God. And when we can identify each other as holy people that God also loves and is journeying with, I think that grants us a little bit more grace for each other. For the love of God is this, that we obey God's commandments. And this word, they shouldn't be burdensome. That is tough. I think it's another way to help us confess. We get it. It's going to be tough. I'm not saying this is easy, right? We've kind of heard that saying too. Jesus didn't say this is going to be easy, but it is possible. It is difficult to love one another. It's difficult to love that which is different from yourself, but it is possible, right? It's not the impossible. And so that word also there, to be burdensome, that was helpful. But whatever is born of God conquers the world.
Wow.
So if we can trust that, what is born of God? And I think the temptation is to be the judges of what we think is born of God and what isn't. And then who is born of God and who isn't, right? We become the judge.
Yeah.
So to be weary of that, trust that what God has created is good, and that our response is to love God and then to love God's creation, and not to play God and then to pick what and who gets to be loved.
Right, for sure. Yeah, well said. Bernard.
I had not noticed this before, but as you read this, Beverly, I was drawn into it with the question, everyone who believes that Jesus is the Christ, and again, let me say, whoever believes that Jesus is the Messiah, the Jews were looking for Mashiach, the anointed one who was coming, and behind the Greek word Christos is kreo, to anoint. So wherever you see Christ, you can substitute with Messiah. And now here in what we call the 5th chapter, we've harped on, the author has harped on this so many times, what's the deal? And so I thought, what if we remove the chapter break and we continue? So the commandment we have from him is this, that those who love God must love their brothers and sisters also. Everyone who believes that Jesus is the Messiah has been born of God, and everyone who loves the parent loves the child.
So that's the secret of where the love comes from.
Jesus is the Son of God.
Right.
And he is the Son of the Father. So on earth, this makes sense. How much more? The rabbis had an expression, kal v'chomer. If in this situation this is true, how much more in that situation is it true? And so by this we know that we love the children of God when we love God and obey his commandments. And the commandments, and you may wonder, where is this commandment? Love one another. This is the application of love one another. And so the love of God is this, that we obey his commandments, and his commandments are not burdensome. So here we are. Here we are with the love of God, and it relates directly to Jesus, and that's why the apostle was so concerned about this in the church, because the net result is to disqualify Jesus from who he claimed to be, and then
if we don't live up to that implicit mandate. That's it.
Yes.
Yeah. So on the one hand, there is no fear. We have boldness in judgment. At the same time, we overcome the world. And by the way, King James, I think King James says overcome or overcometh the world. Here, the Revised Standard says conquers the world. Isn't that interesting? Very strong word. And at the same time, we obey. We obey the commandments. And that obedience flows out rather than a contrived obedience. It's not a matter of cooking this up in ourselves, in our hearts, right? It's a matter of, again, that channeling, that hollow channel of God living through us that really makes the fear go away. Perfect love casts out fear. Takes away our fear of judgment and makes our discipleship, our love, our care for one another flow, because it's not ours after all. It belongs to Jesus, the one who lives through us. So the implication of all of this is the words of that familiar hymn, which invite God to live through us. Live out thy life within me becomes an immediate possibility and an immediate requirement, not in an artificial way, but simply through the dynamic of Christ living, manifesting, loving through us. This will continue next time as we keep working our way through 1 John in searching for answers.